There is something happening inside you right now that most people never stop to notice. Your brain is already beginning to shift, slowing its rhythm, softening its grip on the day. You didn't ask it to. It simply knows. Tonight, you'll discover what your struggle to sleep has quietly been trying to tell you. And by the end, you'll understand that every restless night carries a message worth hearing. Welcome to Sleep Science Documentary. Wherever you are right now, perhaps lying in the dark, with thoughts still drifting, or feeling the familiar pull between tiredness and wakefulness, allow yourself to simply rest here. We'll trace 100 sleep science facts about the hidden language of sleeplessness. From the first signals your nervous system sends when rest is near, to the ancient biological clocks encoded in every cell, to the quiet truth your body has been whispering through every difficult night. These gentle journeys through sleep science build a sanctuary for minds that find the night difficult. Your presence here, a soft like, a quiet subscribe, or sharing this with someone who also stares at the ceiling, opens this space to one more restless soul searching for rest. Every small gesture plants a light in the dark for someone who needs it. One peaceful night, one sleepy soul at a time. It means everything to us that you're here. Settle deeper into wherever you're resting now. Let your shoulders drop just slightly. Let your jaw unclench. If it was, you don't need to remember a single thing said tonight. Just notice the weight of your body. That soft, familiar heaviness spreading through your limbs, like a tide coming in gently, pulling you further from the edge of wakefulness, drawing you slowly, inevitably, toward something quieter. Close your eyes and breathe deeply. You're resting where the science of sleep and the language of the body finally meet. Let your mind soften with the knowledge that rest is already finding you. And now we begin. Sleep struggle is one of the most common human experiences on the planet. Researchers estimate that between 30 and 45% of adults worldwide report difficulty falling or staying asleep at some point in their lives. That number has grown steadily over the past 2 decades. Tracked across population studies in North America, Europe, and East Asia. What this tells us is not that something has gone wrong with the human race, but that the conditions of modern life have increasingly pulled against something very old and very biological. Your difficulty sleeping is not a flaw. It is a signal, and tonight, we begin to learn its language. The scientific study of sleep is younger than most people realize. For most of human history, sleep was considered simply the absence of waking life, a passive state, a blank. It was only in the 1950s that researchers discovered sleep is not blank at all. Using early EEG technology, scientists at the University of Chicago recorded the first evidence that the sleeping brain moves through distinct, active stages. The discovery of REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, changed everything. Sleep was not the absence of consciousness. It was a second kind of consciousness entirely. A parallel world the waking mind never fully remembers, but visits every single night without exception. The brain does not simply switch off when you sleep. It shifts through a series of carefully orchestrated states, each serving a different biological function. These stages cycle roughly every 90 minutes throughout the night. Stage 1 is the lightest, a threshold state where the body begins to slow, but the mind can still hear sounds and register light. Stage 2 deepens the rest. Stages 3 and 4 bring the slowest, most restorative brain waves. And then, cycling back, comes REM, the dreaming state, where the brain becomes almost as active as it is during waking. To struggle with sleep is to struggle with a complex biological symphony. Understanding the symphony is the first step. Your sleep struggle likely has a type. Researchers now distinguish between sleep-onset insomnia, difficulty falling asleep, and sleep maintenance insomnia, difficulty staying asleep, and early morning awakening, where the body wakes before rest feels complete. Each type points toward different underlying causes. Sleep-onset insomnia, for example, is strongly associated with elevated evening cortisol and an overactive stress response. Sleep maintenance insomnia often reflects disruptions in the brain's natural sleep architecture, particularly in the regulation of slow-wave sleep. The type of struggle you experience is not random. It is a pattern, and patterns carry information. Cortisol is often called the stress hormone, but it is more accurately a timing hormone. Under healthy conditions, cortisol follows a precise daily rhythm, rising steeply in the first hour after waking, then gradually declining through the day, reaching its lowest point in the hours before sleep. This rhythm is one of the body's primary timekeeping systems. When the rhythm breaks down, when evening cortisol remains elevated instead of falling, the brain receives a signal that it is not yet safe to rest. For many people who struggle with sleep, this is the root of the difficulty. Not a broken sleep system, but a stress system that has forgotten to let go of the day. The body's internal timekeeping system is called the circadian clock. Every cell in the human body carries molecular clockwork, a set of interlocking proteins that cycle over roughly 24 hours. The master clock is housed in a tiny region of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN, a cluster of about 20,000 neurons, sitting just above the optic nerve. This clock receives direct input from light. It synchronizes the body's biological rhythms to the rising and setting of the sun. When light exposure is disrupted, when evenings are too bright or mornings are too dark, the clock drifts quietly out of alignment. And when the clock drifts, sleep becomes elusive in ways that no amount of willpower can fully correct. Light is the single most powerful regulator of human sleep. Specifically, short wavelength blue light, the kind emitted by screens, LED lighting, and energy-efficient bulbs, suppresses the production of melatonin, the hormone that signals nightfall to the brain. Research has found that even modest light exposure, around 30 to 100 lux, roughly the level of a softly lit room in the evening, can measurably delay melatonin onset in sensitive individuals. The brain does not require complete darkness to fall asleep, but it does respond to the subtle gradient of dimming light as a signal that night is arriving. In a world where light rarely dims on its own, that signal rarely arrives cleanly. Melatonin is not a sleeping pill. It is a timing signal. The pineal gland, a small structure deep within the brain, begins releasing melatonin in response to darkness. Typically, around 2 hours before the body's natural sleep time. Melatonin does not force sleep. It opens the biological window for sleep to occur. Think of it as a key turning a lock, rather than a door being pushed open. This distinction matters because it explains why melatonin supplements are effective for jet lag and shift work, where the timing of sleep needs to be adjusted, but less consistently effective for insomnia rooted in anxiety or chronic stress. Alongside the circadian clock, the body runs a second sleep regulation system called the homeostatic drive. This system accumulates sleep pressure, a biological need for rest, with every hour of wakefulness. The chemical responsible for this pressure is adenosine, a byproduct of cellular energy use. As the brain works throughout the day, adenosine builds up in the spaces between neurons. The longer you stay awake, the more adenosine accumulates, and the stronger the pull towards sleep becomes. Caffeine works not by giving you energy, but by blocking adenosine receptors, temporarily masking the pressure without releasing it. When the caffeine clears, the pressure returns, often all at once. So what does your sleep struggle say about you at this first milestone in our journey? The science suggests this. Your difficulty sleeping is rarely a disorder of sleep itself. It is most often a disorder of transition, a difficulty in the biological, neurological, and emotional systems that allow the brain to release the waking state and accept rest. The sleep system itself, for most people who struggle, is intact. The challenge lies in what surrounds it, in the signals feeding into it, in the cortisol that stays too high, the light that stays too bright, and the mind that has not yet learned to let the day end. That is where tonight's journey takes us next. The phrase sleep hygiene was coined by sleep researcher Peter Howry in 1977 and has since become the foundation of behavioral sleep medicine. Sleep hygiene refers to the collection of habits, environments, and behaviors that support consistent, restful sleep. Despite its clinical-sounding name, it is simply a description of the conditions the circadian clock and homeostatic system need in order to work properly. Consistent wake times, limited light exposure in the evening, keeping the bed associated with sleep rather than wakefulness. These practices do not force sleep. They restore the conditions under which sleep naturally arises. Body temperature plays a role in sleep that is easy to overlook. The body's core temperature begins to drop in the hours before sleep, a signal that, like the melatonin rise, marks the opening of the sleep window. This temperature drop is not incidental. It is actively driven by the brain. Blood vessels in the hands and feet dilate, releasing heat to the environment, which is why warming the hands and feet before bed actually accelerates sleep onset. The ideal sleeping environment for most adults is between 60 and 67 degrees Fahrenheit. Rooms that are too warm can delay sleep onset and reduce the proportion of slow-wave sleep, even when the person manages to fall asleep. The relationship between sleep and the immune system is closer than most people realize. During deep, slow-wave sleep, the immune system becomes particularly active, producing and releasing cytokines, proteins that coordinate the body's inflammatory and repair responses. Research has consistently shown that people who sleep fewer than 6 hours per night are significantly more likely to develop respiratory infections when exposed to a virus. Sleep is not rest from the work of living. Sleep is where much of the body's deepest work quietly happens, invisibly, without fanfare, while the conscious mind is elsewhere. The body that rests is the body that heals. Memory consolidation is one of the most studied functions of sleep, and recent research has deepened our understanding considerably. During sleep, the hippocampus, the brain region most central to forming new memories, systematically replays the day's experiences, transferring them to long-term storage in the cortex. This process, called systems consolidation, happens in coordination with the slow oscillations of deep sleep. What we now know is that the brain does not simply store memories during sleep. It curates them, strengthening some, weakening others, integrating new information with what is already known. A night of poor sleep doesn't just leave you tired. It leaves the day's learning floating, unanchored, in temporary storage. The glymphatic system is one of the most significant neuroscience discoveries of the past decade. Identified by researchers at the University of Rochester in 2013 and studied in increasing detail since then, the glymphatic system is essentially the brain's waste clearance network. During sleep, particularly during deep, slow-wave sleep, the spaces between brain cells expand by up to 60%, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to flush through and remove metabolic waste products. Among the substances cleared by this process is amyloid beta, a protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. Chronic sleep disruption impairs glymphatic clearance. The brain that does not rest sufficiently is not simply tired. It is, in a measurable sense, accumulating what it cannot afford to keep. Sleep disruption and mental health exist in a bidirectional relationship. For decades, poor sleep was understood as a symptom of conditions like depression and anxiety. More recent research has reframed this understanding. We now recognize that sleep disruption often precedes the onset of mood disorders, sometimes by months or years, and actively contributes to their development. The brain regions most involved in emotional regulation, particularly the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, are among the most sensitive to sleep loss. A sleep-deprived prefrontal cortex is less able to modulate the amygdala's response to stress, and emotional responses become less proportionate. The amygdala less anchored, the prefrontal cortex less able to offer its quiet perspective. The mind that cannot sleep is also the mind that finds the world a little harder to hold gently. Anxiety and sleep loss form one of the most well-documented feedback loops in behavioral neuroscience. Anxiety activates the sympathetic nervous system, the body's alerting response, which primes the brain for threat detection, increases heart rate, and keeps cognitive systems in a state of heightened readiness. This neurological state is fundamentally incompatible with sleep onset, which requires the opposite: activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, a slowing of the heart, a downregulation of threat processing, a quiet communication from the brain to the body that the watch is over. When anxiety is present at bedtime, these two systems issue contradictory instructions simultaneously. The result is the experience familiar to millions. Lying in bed, exhausted, the prefrontal cortex and amygdala in an unresolved conversation that neither can end alone. The phenomenon of sleep effort is one of the most counterintuitive findings in insomnia research. The harder a person tries to fall asleep, the more difficult sleep becomes. Researchers call this sleep effort or sleep-related performance anxiety. And it is one of the primary mechanisms by which temporary sleep disruption becomes chronic insomnia. Trying to sleep activates the same arousal systems that trying to solve a problem activates. The brain, primed to succeed at tasks, treats the goal of sleep like any other goal, and in doing so, creates exactly the neurological conditions that prevent sleep from arriving. Paradoxically, the most effective approach to sleep onset is not effort, but acceptance. Not trying to sleep, but allowing it. Cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, known as CBTI, remains the first-line recommended treatment for chronic insomnia, according to both the American College of Physicians and the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, reaffirmed in clinical evidence reviews through the most recent guidelines. It outperforms sleep medications in long-term outcome studies, with effects that persist after treatment ends rather than fading when the intervention is removed. CBTI works by targeting the cognitive patterns and behavioral habits that maintain insomnia, the catastrophic thinking about sleep, the excessive time spent in bed while awake, the clock watching, the gradual withdrawal from activity out of tiredness. It does not teach the brain to sleep. It removes the obstacles the brain has quietly built against sleeping. Sleep restriction is one of the most counterintuitive components of CBTI, and one of the most effective. The technique involves temporarily limiting the time spent in bed to match actual sleep time, which, paradoxically, increases sleep pressure and consolidates fragmented sleep into a more solid period of rest. For someone accustomed to spending 9 or 10 hours in bed while sleeping only 5 or 6, this feels difficult. But the science is clear. A slightly shorter period of high quality, consolidated sleep is neurologically more restorative than a long period of fragmented, shallow rest. The body heals more deeply when it sleeps with intention. The role of genetics in sleep need has become significantly better understood in recent years. Most adults require between 7 and 9 hours of sleep for optimal function, a range determined largely by genetic factors influencing the sensitivity of adenosine receptors and the efficiency of sleep architecture. A small percentage of the population, researchers estimate less than 3%, carry a gene variant that genuinely allows them to function well on 6 hours or fewer. These individuals are called natural short sleepers. The vast majority of people who believe they function well on minimal sleep are, according to objective cognitive testing, performing below their own baseline, simply unaware of the distance between what they feel and what they can do. Adaptation to sleep loss is not the same as resilience to it. Shift work and irregular schedules impose a particular form of sleep disruption that researchers have come to call social jet lag, a chronic misalignment between the body's internal clock and the schedule demanded by social and occupational life. Studies published in recent years have found that social jet lag is associated not just with fatigue and mood disturbance, but with measurable metabolic consequences, including altered insulin sensitivity and elevated markers of cardiovascular risk. The body can adapt to many things. Persistent misalignment between the circadian clock and the waking world is not easily among them. The clock does not forget what time it believes it is. The relationship between sleep and pain is bidirectional and often underappreciated. Sleep disruption lowers pain thresholds. making the body more sensitive to stimuli it might otherwise manage with ease. This has been demonstrated in laboratory studies where subjects deprived of slow-wave sleep reported significantly higher pain ratings to the same stimuli compared to well-rested controls. For people living with chronic pain, this creates a particularly gentle trap. Pain disrupts sleep, and disrupted sleep amplifies pain. Research published in the journal Sleep in recent years has identified slow-wave sleep in particular as the most protective stage, deepening our understanding of why restorative sleep is not a luxury for those in pain, but a physiological foundation. Napping has a nuanced relationship with nighttime sleep. Brief naps of 10 to 20 minutes, sometimes called power naps, can improve alertness, mood, and cognitive performance without significantly reducing nighttime sleep pressure. Longer naps, particularly those exceeding 45 minutes, risk inducing sleep inertia, the groggy, disoriented state caused by waking from deep slow-wave sleep, and can reduce homeostatic sleep pressure enough to delay nighttime sleep onset. For people with insomnia, daytime napping is generally set aside as part of sleep restriction. For those with generally healthy sleep, a brief afternoon rest may be one of the most accessible tools for cognitive restoration available. At this first milestone, 25 facts into our journey, a picture is beginning to emerge. Your sleep struggle is not a mystery without a map. It exists within a biological system with known components. A circadian clock regulated by light and temperature, a homeostatic pressure built from adenosine, a stress response that can override both, and a cognitive layer that sometimes turns sleep into a problem to be solved rather than a state to be entered. The science of sleep does not tell you that you are broken. It tells you precisely where the tension lives, and that is where understanding begins. Let's pause here and notice your body. As you breathe out slowly, appreciate each tiny cell inside. Trillions of processes working in silence. Your heart beating. Your lungs breathing. Your brain quietly sorting the day. All without your command. Your body has always carried this knowledge. It has been here before, in this threshold, countless times. Notice the gentle weight of your limbs, the soft rhythm of your breathing, the warmth where your body meets the surface beneath you. You are a complete, self-balancing system. And right now, that system is tending to you. Now we continue. The human brain during wakefulness operates largely in a high-frequency electrical state, beta waves, associated with active thinking and alertness. As sleep approaches, the brain shifts toward alpha waves, a slower, calmer pattern associated with relaxed wakefulness and the closing of active thought. This alpha state is accessible during meditation, during quiet rest, and in the moments just before sleep. Practices that deliberately invite alpha states, slow breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, gentle body scans, are not metaphorical aids to sleep. They are neurologically specific approaches that move the brain toward the electrical state from which sleep naturally emerges. The default mode network is a set of brain regions that activates during mind-wandering, self-referential thought, and rumination. Research from multiple institutions over the past decade has identified overactivity of the default mode network as a consistent feature of insomnia. when people with chronic sleep difficulty lie down to rest. This network, involved in replaying past events, anticipating future situations, and generating internal narrative, remains active at levels more typical of engaged, task-focused wakefulness. The experience of lying awake with a busy mind is not simply restlessness. It is the default mode network holding the brain in a waking state the body is otherwise ready to leave. The autonomic nervous system has two primary branches: the sympathetic system, which prepares the body for action, and the parasympathetic system, which returns the body to rest and recovery. Sleep requires a clear shift toward parasympathetic dominance. Heart rate slows. Breathing deepens. Blood pressure drops. Digestion resumes activity it set aside during the day. For many people who struggle with sleep, this transition is delayed or incomplete, the sympathetic system remaining partially active through the early hours of the night, keeping the body in a state of subtle readiness. The breath is one of the few voluntary pathways that can shift this balance from the outside in. Slow, controlled breathing is one of the most researched approaches for reducing pre-sleep arousal. Breathing at a rate of approximately 5 to 6 breaths per minute, roughly 5 seconds in and 5 seconds out, activates the vagus nerve, the primary conduit of the parasympathetic nervous system. This produces measurable reductions in heart rate, blood pressure, and cortisol. A study published in the journal Frontiers in Psychology found that just 10 minutes of slow breathing before bed significantly reduced pre-sleep arousal and improved sleep quality. The mechanism is not mysterious. The breath speaks directly to the nervous system in a language older than words. Worry and sleep are neurologically at odds in a specific and well-documented way. When the brain engages in worry, repeatedly processing uncertain future outcomes, the amygdala and anterior cingulate cortex maintain a level of activation that directly opposes the deactivation required for sleep onset. Worry is a form of problem-solving without resolution. The brain cycling through possibilities in search of safety it cannot find in the dark. Research has shown that scheduled worry time, deliberately setting aside 10 to 15 minutes earlier in the evening to write down concerns and possible next steps, significantly reduces nighttime intrusive thinking. The brain, given a proper time and place for its concerns, is more willing to set them down at bedtime. The bedroom environment shapes sleep in ways that extend beyond temperature and light. The brain is a pattern recognition system, and it forms associations between environments and states. When the bed becomes associated with waking activities, working, scrolling, watching, replaying the day, the brain begins to treat the bedroom as a cue for wakefulness rather than rest. Sleep researchers call this conditioned arousal. The bedroom that once felt like a refuge begins to feel, subtly, like a signal to stay alert. Restoring that association, using the bed primarily for sleep, is one of the simplest and most consistent approaches in behavioral sleep medicine. The environment teaches the brain what to expect. Exercise has a well-established positive effect on sleep quality, particularly on slow-wave sleep. Regular aerobic exercise, at any time of day, though ideally not within 2 to 3 hours of bedtime, increases the depth and duration of slow-wave sleep and reduces the time it takes to fall asleep. A meta-analysis published in 2023 found that even moderate exercise performed consistently over 4 to 8 weeks produced meaningful improvements in both subjective sleep quality and sleep architecture. The mechanism involves multiple pathways: reductions in anxiety and mood disturbance, regulation of circadian rhythms, and a direct increase in homeostatic sleep pressure through adenosine production. The body that moves during the day sleeps more deeply at night. Alcohol is one of the most commonly used sleep aids in the world, and one of the most widely misunderstood. Alcohol does accelerate sleep onset. It is a central nervous system depressant that reduces the time to fall asleep. But its effects on sleep architecture are substantially disruptive. Alcohol suppresses REM sleep in the first half of the night, fragments sleep in the second half as it is metabolized, and increases nighttime awakenings. Regular use of alcohol as a sleep aid produces tolerance to its sleep onset effects, while the architectural disruption persists and often deepens. The sleeper who reaches for a drink to ease into the night is, over time, borrowing rest from themselves at a cost that accumulates quietly. Caffeine has a half-life in the human body of approximately 5 to 7 hours, though this varies based on genetics. Specifically, variations in the gene CYP1A2, which codes for the liver enzyme responsible for metabolizing caffeine. For slow metabolizers, a cup of coffee consumed at noon may still have half its caffeine concentration circulating in the blood at midnight. Research has found that caffeine consumed 6 hours before bedtime can reduce total sleep time by more than an hour in controlled conditions, an effect most pronounced with higher doses, but measurable even at amounts many people consume without concern. The body adapts to caffeine's alerting effects over time, but the disruption to sleep architecture persists, regardless of tolerance. The afternoon coffee may be costing more than it appears to. The relationship between screen use and sleep is more nuanced than the blue light discussion alone suggests. While blue light does suppress melatonin, recent research has found that the cognitive and emotional stimulation of screen content, particularly social media, news, and interactive media, may be equally significant in disrupting sleep onset. Studies comparing screen use with blue light filters versus screen use without them found only modest differences in sleep onset, suggesting that what the screen shows matters as much as the light it emits. The brain absorbed in stimulating content at 10 in the evening is not a brain preparing for sleep, regardless of the filter applied. Temperature regulation during sleep involves more than the ambient room temperature. The body actively manages its core temperature throughout the night, with the deepest temperature drops occurring during slow-wave sleep. Taking a warm bath or shower 60 to 90 minutes before bed, a practice backed by a systematic review in the journal Sleep Medicine Reviews, accelerates the body's heat loss response, lowering core temperature more quickly and reducing sleep onset time in multiple studies. This is not merely relaxation. It is a gentle physiological adjustment, nudging the sleep window open a little earlier than it might otherwise arrive. The gut-brain axis, the bidirectional communication network between the gastrointestinal system and the central nervous system, has emerged as an increasingly studied factor in sleep research. The gut microbiome produces a range of neurotransmitters and neuromodulators, including precursors to serotonin and GABA. both of which play roles in sleep regulation. Research published in recent years has found associations between gut microbiome diversity and sleep quality, with more diverse microbiomes associated with longer sleep duration and better subjective sleep quality. Dietary patterns that support microbiome health, rich in fiber, fermented foods, and varied plant sources, may have measurable effects on sleep through pathways entirely separate from conventional sleep hygiene. Magnesium is among the most studied minerals in relation to sleep, and the evidence for its role is growing. Magnesium acts as a natural moderator of NMDA receptors in the brain, receptors involved in excitatory neurotransmission, and supports GABA receptor activity, promoting neurological calm. Studies suggest that a significant proportion of adults in Western countries, by some estimates approaching half, consume less magnesium than recommended daily amounts, a gap that may have subtle effects on neurological calm and sleep quality without necessarily meeting the threshold of clinical deficiency. Magnesium glycinate and magnesium threonate are among the forms with the highest bioavailability and the most studied relationship with sleep support. The mineral that so many quietly underconsume is one the sleeping brain quietly depends on. Social connection and sleep quality share a relationship that researchers have begun to document with increasing precision. Studies from the University of California, Berkeley, found that sleep-deprived individuals showed heightened neural responses to social situations and reduced motivation for social interaction, and that others could detect this withdrawal from the face and behavior of sleep-deprived individuals. Loneliness, in turn, predicts worse sleep quality, particularly more fragmented sleep and increased vigilance during the night, possibly reflecting an evolutionary legacy in which social isolation signaled heightened vulnerability. The solitary sleeper lying awake may be, in part, an ancient nervous system looking for the reassurance of the group. Add 40 facts. The pattern is becoming clear. Sleep struggle is not one thing. It is a convergence of light exposure and circadian disruption, of stress chemistry and nervous system arousal, of habits and environments and thoughts that have slowly organized themselves around wakefulness rather than rest. The body has not forgotten how to sleep. The body is surrounded by signals that remind it to stay awake. Tonight's journey is not about fixing what is broken. It is about understanding what the signals are saying, and, one by one, gently changing them. You're still here, still listening, perhaps drifting just at the edge. Take a slow breath. Notice how your body has settled a little since we began. We're exploring sleep science together. You and I, and every other quiet mind listening in the dark tonight. There's no hurry. Just the gentle current of curiosity carrying us forward. Let's continue. Sleep need changes across the lifespan in ways that are often misunderstood. Newborns sleep 16 to 18 hours daily, spending the majority in REM sleep, a state now understood to be central to the massive neural development occurring in the early brain. Teenagers experience a biological shift in circadian timing called sleep phase delay, in which the release of melatonin shifts 2 to 3 hours later than in adults, making early school start times neurologically mismatched with adolescent biology. Adult sleep needs stabilize, and older adults often experience earlier circadian timing, lighter sleep, and more nighttime awakenings. changes that are biological rather than pathological, though they are frequently interpreted as insomnia when they are simply the body aging through its rhythms. REM sleep is now understood to be the stage most involved in emotional processing. During REM, the brain replays emotionally significant experiences, but does so in a neurochemical environment notably low in norepinephrine, the stress-associated neurotransmitter. Researcher Matthew Walker at UC Berkeley has described this as the brain revisiting difficult memories without the physiological stress response, essentially reprocessing emotional experiences and extracting meaning without re-traumatizing. People deprived of REM sleep show heightened reactivity to negative emotional memories and reduced ability to contextualize distressing experiences. Sleep is not simply recovery from the day. For the emotional brain, it is the day's final act, the one that decides what the day will mean. Post-traumatic stress is associated with some of the most significant sleep disruptions documented in clinical research. Nightmares, nighttime hypervigilance, and fragmented sleep architecture are among the most common and persistent symptoms. What research has clarified over the past decade is that these sleep disruptions are not simply side effects. They actively maintain the condition itself. The failure of REM sleep to properly process difficult memories keeps those memories neurologically unfinished, accessible to the waking mind in ways that increase daytime distress. Treatments that address sleep specifically, including image rehearsal therapy for nightmares, have shown measurable benefits for the underlying distress, not only for the sleep itself. The brain during deep sleep generates slow oscillations at approximately half a cycle per second, the slowest brain waves measurable in a living human being. These slow oscillations coordinate a process called sleep spindle-dependent memory consolidation, during which information encoded during the day is replicated and transferred from temporary hippocampal storage to long-term cortical networks. Research published in Nature Neuroscience has shown that the density and quality of these slow oscillations declines with age, helping to explain why older adults sometimes experience a sense that new learning feels slower or less durable than it once was. The sleeping brain is not passive. It is working, precisely, on what matters most. Chronotype, the natural tendency toward earlier or later sleep and wake times, is more genetically determined than most people appreciate. Studies of large population samples have identified hundreds of genetic variants associated with chronotype, collectively explaining a substantial portion of the variation in sleep timing preferences between individuals. Those with late chronotypes, the owls, are not simply undisciplined. Their bodies are set to a different clock, one that has existed as a genetic variant throughout human history. One evolutionary hypothesis, supported by observations of small-scale traditional communities, suggests that variation in sleep timing across a group may have provided continuous overnight awareness. Early risers and late sleepers together ensuring someone was always alert. It is a theory, not a certainty, but it offers the night owl a gentler way to understand their biology. Sleep apnea is among the most underdiagnosed sleep conditions in the world, characterized by repeated partial or complete narrowing of the upper airway during sleep. It fragments sleep architecture by triggering brief awakenings, often dozens or hundreds of times per night, that the sleeper does not consciously remember. The consequence is profound sleep fragmentation, producing daytime fatigue, cognitive changes, and mood disturbance, along with elevated risk of cardiovascular and metabolic effects with chronic, untreated duration. Estimates suggest that approximately 1 billion people worldwide have at least mild obstructive sleep apnea, with the majority unaware. For many of them, recognition has been the beginning of the most restorative sleep of their lives. Restless legs syndrome, RL, is a neurological condition characterized by an irresistible urge to move the legs, typically in the evening and during rest. It affects approximately 5 to 15% of the adult population and is one of the more common contributors to sleep onset difficulty. The neurological mechanism involves the dopaminergic system, the same neurotransmitter system central to motivation and movement. Iron deficiency, which impairs dopamine synthesis, is a common contributing factor, and iron supplementation is among the first approaches considered in individuals with low ferritin levels. RLS is often set aside as mere restlessness. It is, in fact, a specific neurological signal, one that, when recognized, is often very responsive to care. The relationship between sleep and the body's appetite signals involves multiple hormonal pathways. Sleep deprivation elevates ghrelin, the appetite-stimulating hormone, and suppresses leptin, the hormone that signals fullness. Even a single night of partial sleep loss produces measurable shifts in these hormones, increasing subjective hunger in controlled studies and specifically increasing appetite for higher-calorie foods. Chronic sleep loss has been associated with increased weight gain risk in longitudinal population studies across multiple countries. The body that is not sleeping is also a body that is, at the hormonal level, searching for more fuel and steering toward the densest available source it can find. Microsleeps are brief, involuntary episodes of sleep lasting from 1 to 30 seconds, occurring when sleep pressure becomes very high. During a microsleep, the eyes may remain open, but the brain essentially withdraws from the environment, processing input but not encoding it meaningfully. Microsleeps are most common during monotonous tasks, driving on a highway, attending a long meeting, reading a screen, and are most concerning because the person experiencing them is typically unaware they are occurring. The brain does not announce when it has briefly surrendered. It simply returns from somewhere it did not tell you it had gone. Halfway through our journey, the answer is taking form. What does your sleep struggle say about you? It says that you are a biological creature, living in a world that has changed faster than biological systems can adapt. It says that your nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do: maintaining vigilance, processing unresolved stress, holding memory, regulating emotion. The struggle is not failure. It is responsiveness. The work of learning to sleep is, in large part, the work of communicating to a very old system that the night is safe, that the threats are manageable, that the body is permitted to release the day. That message, delivered consistently, is one the body deeply wants to receive. Let each breath remind you, this moment belongs only to you. While the world continues turning, this breath, this quiet second, you are breathing and listening, exists in a rhythm older than any thought you have ever had. Your body has been here before, In this threshold between waking and sleep, thousands of times. It knows the way. Your only task tonight is to allow it to find that way again, without direction, without effort. Let the knowing take over, and we continue drifting. Dreams have been studied for thousands of years and scientifically investigated for nearly a century. Yet their function remains one of neuroscience's most considered questions. The most current evidence supports a role for dreaming in emotional regulation, threat simulation, and creative integration. During REM sleep, the brain activates visual, motor, and emotional processing areas, while the prefrontal cortex, the region associated with logical evaluation and self-monitoring, becomes relatively quiet. Dreams are, neurologically, what happens when the emotional brain narrates in the absence of the editor. Lucid dreaming, the state of being aware that one is dreaming while the dream is occurring, is now well established as a real neurological phenomenon. EEG studies have documented that during lucid dreams, the prefrontal cortex shows increased activation compared to non-lucid REM sleep, suggesting that a degree of reflective awareness can coexist with the dreaming state. A small percentage of people experience lucid dreams naturally. Techniques for inviting them, including reality testing and the MILD technique, have been validated in laboratory settings. The sleeping mind, it turns out, is not always entirely absent from itself. Sleep paralysis occurs when the muscular stillness of the body's voluntary muscles during REM sleep, which naturally prevents acting out dreams, persists briefly into waking consciousness. The person is aware, unable to move, and may experience vivid hypnagogic hallucinations, sensory experiences generated by the still dreaming brain overlaid on the waking environment. Sleep paralysis affects approximately 8% of the general population at least once in a lifetime, and is more common during sleep deprivation, irregular schedules, and periods of high stress. Across cultures, before it was neurologically understood, sleep paralysis gave rise to some of humanity's most persistent accounts of nighttime visitation. Every one of them, in a sense, a story the dreaming brain told about its own boundaries. The architecture of a healthy night of sleep is not uniform. The first cycles of the night contain the most slow-wave sleep. Later cycles contain the most REM sleep. This means that the final hours of sleep, the hours most often lost to early alarms or busy schedules, are disproportionately rich in REM. A person sleeping 6 hours instead of 8 is not simply losing 25% of their sleep, they are losing a significantly larger proportion of their REM sleep, the stage most involved in emotional regulation, creative integration, and the consolidation of emotionally significant experiences. The loss is not linear. It concentrates at the end, in the hours the world most often takes first. Hyperarousal is the term sleep researchers use to describe a state of elevated physiological and cognitive activation that persists into the night in chronic insomnia. Brain imaging studies have found that people with chronic insomnia show higher overnight metabolic rates in brain regions associated with alertness and emotion compared to sound sleepers. Even during sleep itself, this hyperarousal appears to represent a constitutional difference in arousal regulation that creates vulnerability to sleep disruption when life circumstances increase stress. The person with chronic insomnia is often not simply an anxious person who can't sleep. They are frequently a person whose nervous system runs a little brighter, a little warmer than average, and for whom the conditions of rest simply need a little more preparation and room. The phenomenon of the first night effect is well documented in sleep research. When sleeping in an unfamiliar environment, one hemisphere of the brain maintains a higher level of vigilance than the other, a phenomenon that appears to reflect an ancient adaptive mechanism for maintaining environmental awareness in novel locations. This effect diminishes on the second night in the same environment. It helps explain why hotels, travel, and unfamiliar sleeping conditions so reliably produce difficult sleep, even in people who otherwise sleep easily. The brain in a strange place is not being unreasonable. It is keeping watch, as it always has, until the place becomes known. Mindfulness-based approaches have accumulated growing evidence as effective supports for insomnia, particularly a variant developed for this purpose called mindfulness-based therapy for insomnia, or MBTI. A systematic review published in 2023 found that mindfulness practices, including body scan meditation, mindful breathing, and acceptance-based reframing, produced meaningful improvements in sleep onset time and wake time after sleep onset, with effects comparable to CBTI in several trials. The mechanism is well understood. Mindfulness practices reduce default mode network overactivity, lower sympathetic arousal, and cultivate the capacity for non-judgmental observation, the psychological opposite of the effortful, evaluative state that insomnia maintains. The perception of sleep is often more difficult than the reality. Research using polysomnography, the detailed measurement of sleep, has consistently found that people with insomnia tend to underestimate their total sleep time and overestimate the time spent awake. A person who believes they slept only 3 hours may have, on objective measurement, slept 5 or 6. This does not mean the suffering is invented. The fragmented, light, and unresting quality of insomnia-affected sleep may feel less restorative than deeper sleep, even when total time is similar. But it does mean that the story the suffering mind tells about the night is often darker than the night itself was. And that story, gently examined, can sometimes be changed. Sound environments shape sleep quality in ways that are often underestimated. Low-frequency noise, traffic, air conditioning, distant machinery does not reliably wake sleepers, but does reduce slow-wave sleep and increase nighttime cortisol levels, even when the sleeper reports sleeping through it. Certain sound environments, particularly pink noise and soft, rhythmic stimulation, have shown promising results in laboratory studies for enhancing slow-wave sleep and supporting next-day memory performance, with effects that vary across individuals and study designs. The quality of the acoustic environment during sleep may matter more than the simple presence or absence of sound. Where true silence is unavailable, the right kind of sound may be the closest available substitute. The relationship between sleep and cardiovascular health is one of the most robustly documented in epidemiology. People who consistently sleep fewer than 6 hours per night have a notably elevated risk of hypertension, coronary artery disease, and stroke compared to those sleeping 7 to 8 hours. The mechanisms include chronic sympathetic nervous system activation, impaired blood pressure reduction during sleep, the normal nocturnal drop that gives the cardiovascular system its nightly rest, and elevated inflammatory markers. A single night of total sleep deprivation produces measurable increases in blood pressure and inflammatory cytokines in healthy young adults. The heart that does not rest does not fully recover, and the heart that rests well carries its days more lightly. During non-REM sleep, the brain generates bursts of coordinated neural activity called sleep spindles, oscillations of 11 to 16 cycles per second, lasting 1 to 2 seconds each. Sleep spindles are generated by the thalamus and appear to play a specific role in protecting sleep from disruption, creating windows of reduced sensory response that prevent environmental stimuli from reaching consciousness. People with high spindle density, more spindles per hour of sleep, show greater resilience to sleep disruption by noise and other stimuli. Spindle density has also been associated with cognitive flexibility and fluid intelligence. The sleeping brain that spins most actively may be the one most actively tending to itself. Adenosine, the sleep pressure molecule, accumulates not uniformly throughout the brain, but preferentially in the basal forebrain and cortex, where it acts on specific receptor subtypes to reduce excitability and promote the transition to sleep. Recent research using advanced neural mapping techniques has allowed researchers to trace the precise circuits through which adenosine accumulation translates into sleep behavior, advancing our understanding of the molecular architecture of the sleep drive. The tiredness you feel is not vague. It is spatially specific, chemically precise, and progressively building from the moment you woke this morning. It has been building toward this moment all along. The sleeping brain is not cut off from the outside world. Certain sounds, particularly the sound of one's own name, the sound of a crying infant, or sounds associated with personal meaning, continue to reach the sleeping brain and trigger neural responses even from within deep sleep. Research has documented that meaningful sound stimuli produce larger neural responses during sleep than acoustically similar but personally irrelevant sounds. The sleeping brain is filtering, evaluating, and prioritizing. It has not abandoned its post. It has merely narrowed its attention to what, in this particular life, matters most. Sleep conditions are disproportionately underdiagnosed in women. The most well-known sleep disorders were historically studied primarily in male populations, and the clinical presentations derived from those populations may not fully capture how these conditions appear in women. Women with sleep apnea, for example, are more likely to present with insomnia, fatigue, and mood changes rather than snoring witnessed by a bed partner, leading to later recognition and higher rates of initial misclassification. Sleep medicine is in the process of recalibrating its understanding of how sleep conditions differ across biological sex and hormonal life stage. A recalibration long overdue. Hormonal shifts across the menstrual cycle, pregnancy, postpartum period, and menopause each produce distinct changes in sleep architecture and subjective sleep quality. In the luteal phase of the menstrual cycle, progesterone, which has mild sedative properties, typically supports sleep depth, while its decline before menstruation often produces sleep fragmentation and increased awakening. During menopause, the withdrawal of estrogen disrupts thermoregulation, leading to the nighttime temperature changes that fragment sleep for many women during this transition. The sleep of women across the lifespan is not simply the same biology at different hormonal backgrounds. In meaningful ways, it is a different story, one that deserves its own careful telling. Grief disrupts sleep through multiple simultaneous pathways. The elevated arousal of acute grief, persistent rumination, fragmented sleep architecture, resolves over months to years in most people. But research published in recent years has identified a subgroup experiencing prolonged grief disorder, in which the neurological and physiological disruptions of acute grief persist far beyond what might be expected. In this population, sleep disruption is both a symptom and a mechanism. The loss of the REM processing that would normally help integrate the emotional weight of loss becomes one of the reasons the loss remains raw. Attending to sleep in grief is not beside the point. It may be very close to the center of it. The brains of sound sleepers and poor sleepers differ in measurable ways, even during waking hours. People with chronic insomnia show elevated activity in the anterior insula, a region associated with interoceptive awareness and self-monitoring, both at night and during the day. This heightened self-monitoring extends to sleep itself. Insomnia is often accompanied by a kind of nocturnal watchfulness in which the person is simultaneously trying to sleep and monitoring whether they are sleeping. The observer and the observed cannot occupy the same brain simultaneously. The watching is, with great gentleness, precisely what prevents the falling. Sunrise alarm clocks, devices that simulate a gradual increase in light in the 30 to 60 minutes before the target wake time, have shown consistent benefits in improving morning alertness, mood, and the cortisol awakening response in multiple controlled trials. By mimicking the natural dawn signal that regulated human sleep for hundreds of thousands of years, these devices activate the circadian waking signal before the alarm sounds, softening the transition from sleep to waking. They are a quiet technological reconstruction of something the body evolved alongside and has, in most modern sleeping environments, entirely lost. Dreaming about the future, prospective memory processes during sleep, is a less studied but increasingly recognized function of the sleeping brain. Research has found that REM sleep activates neural networks involved in planning and future thinking, suggesting that the dreaming brain may not only process the past, but quietly simulate possible paths forward. The experience of waking from a dream with unexpected clarity about a problem, a decision, or a direction may reflect this. The associative networks of the dreaming brain, drawing connections it could not make under the constraint of waking logic, guided by something that operates below the level of effort. The social dimension of sleep, the way sleep behaviors and qualities move through relationships and communities, is an area of growing research interest. Studies have found that sleep quality of romantic partners is significantly correlated, partly through shared environments and schedules, partly through direct physiological co-regulation. Partners of poor sleepers show elevated signs of sleep disturbance themselves, even in the absence of objective noise or movement. Conversely, sleeping near a familiar, trusted person is associated with increased slow-wave sleep and reduced overnight cortisol in some studies. The body that feels safe sleeps more deeply. Safety, it turns out, is partly something we build for each other. Light therapy. Exposure to bright, full-spectrum light of 10,000 lux in the morning is one of the most rigorously studied approaches for circadian rhythm conditions and seasonal mood changes. Morning light resets the circadian clock by signaling to the suprachiasmatic nucleus that the day has begun, suppressing residual melatonin and initiating the cortisol awakening response. For individuals with delayed sleep phase, those who cannot fall asleep before 2 or 3 in the morning, consistent morning bright light exposure is one of the most effective biological tools for gradually shifting the clock earlier. The light that ends the night is, neurologically, the same light that ensures the next night can begin on time. The concept of sleep debt, the accumulated deficit of sleep relative to need, has been refined in recent years. While short-term sleep debt from a few nights of disruption can be largely recovered with extended sleep, chronic sleep debt accumulated over weeks or months may produce more lasting neurological effects. Studies using cognitive testing have found that the subjective adaptation to chronic sleep restriction, the feeling of having adjusted, does not correspond to objective cognitive performance, which remains below baseline. The mind that has adapted to less sleep has adapted to a quieter version of itself, and it does not always recognize the distance it has traveled. Afternoon rest in cultures with long traditions of midday sleep has been associated with cardiovascular benefits in longitudinal studies. A large-scale study from Greece found that habitual napping was associated with notably lower coronary mortality. However, the relationship is nuanced. Very long or very frequent napping has been associated in some research with metabolic risk, possibly because it reflects underlying sleep deprivation or other health factors. The afternoon rest, in the right proportion and context, may be one of the oldest health practices available. Like most things the body offers, its wisdom lies in balance rather than excess. The sleeping brain generates not only slow oscillations and sleep spindles, but also K-complexes, large, characteristic waveforms appearing in stage 2 sleep that serve a dual function, protecting sleep from disruption while simultaneously facilitating memory consolidation. K-complexes appear spontaneously, but are also reliably evoked by external stimuli, a sound, a shift, without waking the sleeper. They are the brain's nighttime negotiation with the world, acknowledging the signal, deciding it does not require waking, and incorporating the information without sacrificing rest. A small act of editorial judgment, repeated quietly hundreds of times across the night. 3/4 of the way through our journey, the shape of an answer is clear. What your sleep struggle says about you is this: you are a sensitive system encountering a world that rarely asks permission before it stimulates. The difficulty is not in your sleep. It is in the distance between the conditions your biology was designed for and the conditions your life has made. The quiet, the darkness, the physical safety, the emotional resolution, the social belonging. These are not indulgences. They are specifications, requirements, the things the sleeping brain has always needed and has always known how to use. The work of better sleep is the work of providing them. You may be feeling deeply tired now. That is exactly right. Breathe slowly and feel the rhythm. Your heart beats. Your breath moves. The blood moves through you in its quiet rounds, cycles of pressure and release that have not missed a single moment of your life. You are part of a larger cycling, the tides, the seasons, the sun's steady arc, all of it unhurried, none of it forcing. You don't need to hold anything tonight. Let the cycle carry you. We're almost there now. Sound sleepers do not try to sleep. They create the conditions for sleep and then allow it. The difference is subtle but neurologically real. Trying is an active, evaluative state. Allowing is a passive, receptive one. Every gentle practice in this video, the temperature, the breathing, the darkness, the consistency, is in service of the allowing. The goal is never sleep itself. The goal is the quiet removal of what stands between you and sleep that was already there. The body knows its way to sleep. It has made this journey every night for the entirety of your life. The path is not lost. Sometimes it is simply obscured by light, by worry, by effort, by the accumulated weight of days that didn't fully end before the next one began. You can allow it to find its way again tonight. Acceptance is a neurological act. When the mind stops resisting the experience of wakefulness and simply observes it, without alarm, without the story that this moment means something has gone wrong, the arousal system loses some of its fuel. Acceptance does not immediately produce sleep, but it creates the conditions from which sleep is far more likely to emerge on its own. Your breathing is always available. Longer out than in. Again. The out-breath activates the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve signals the parasympathetic system. The parasympathetic system begins lowering the heart rate, relaxing the blood vessels, softening the muscles of the face and jaw. The breath is the body's most accessible path back to itself. Temperature is dropping. Your core temperature, quietly, automatically, without your effort. This is one of the oldest signals in the mammalian repertoire, the body's way of saying, the day has ended. The warmth is leaving. Rest is permitted now. Adenosine is present. The day's work is behind you. Every hour of wakefulness built this quiet pressure, and now it rests against the mind like a hand against a door, gentle and steady and patient. The pressure of sleep is real. It is chemistry. It is already here, and it has been waiting for you. The glymphatic system is beginning its work. The spaces between your neurons are expanding. Cerebrospinal fluid is moving through the channels of your brain, clearing what the day's thinking left behind, preparing the tissue for tomorrow. You don't need to do anything for this to happen. It is happening because you are here, and still, and breathing. Memory is being sorted. The hippocampus is already beginning its quiet work, deciding what to keep, what to soften, what to let recede into the background of everything you've ever known. The day is being filed. You don't have to hold it anymore. It is already being tended. Somewhere in your body right now, the immune system is doing its most active work of the night. Cytokines are coordinating repair. Tissue that was asked much of during the day is beginning to restore itself. The body is a healer that works best in the dark, in the quiet, when the conscious mind has stepped aside and given it room. Melatonin is present. It was there before you were aware of it, opening the biological window, turning the key in the lock. The hormonal conditions for sleep exist in you right now. The chemistry is ready. The body is ready. You are already closer to sleep than you know, and the distance is only shrinking. Your nervous system has been listening to this voice for a long time now. The slow breathing, the gentle descent through 100 facts, the permission, offered again and again, to release the day. The nervous system is a learning system. It is learning, right now, that this is a safe place, that this voice means rest is already arriving. The thoughts still moving through your mind are not obstacles. They are the last of the day's processing, completing their circuits, finding their places, dissolving into the background hum of a brain moving toward its resting state. You don't need to follow them. Simply watch them pass, the way you might watch leaves on the surface of a very still pond, moving gently toward the far shore. Sleep is not a destination. It is a tide. You cannot swim to it. You can only stop swimming and let it find you where you are. Let your body be still. Let your breath slow. Let the tide come in its own time, which is now. The brain state you're approaching, the threshold between waking and sleep, the hypnagogic state, is one of the richest states of consciousness available to the human mind. In this state, the prefrontal cortex relaxes its editorial oversight, and the associative networks generate images, sounds, and impressions that waking logic would order into more familiar patterns. Many people experience this state and feel the first edge of dreaming arriving. It is, in fact, the beginning of rest coming to meet them. What your sleep struggle has been saying, all along, is something that deserves to be heard gently. I need the conditions for rest, and I have not always had them. Not a broken body, not a failing mind, a sensitive, responsive system communicating its requirements with the only language it has. And you are here, tonight, listening. That is already a kind of answer. The weight of your body on the surface beneath you is real. Feel it now. The patient pressure of gravity, which has held you your entire life, every sleeping and every waking moment, is holding you here. You are not required to hold yourself up tonight. Your heartbeat is slowing, slightly, naturally, without effort on your part. The autonomic nervous system is making its quiet adjustments, as it always does when you give it room. This is not something you are doing. This is something being done for you, gently, because you have allowed it. Somewhere in the world, right now, someone is listening to these same words and beginning to drift. You are not alone in this. The quiet community of people who find the night difficult is vast, and it is present across every time zone, every night, in the dark of the whole turning world. You are resting among them tonight. The science of sleep has given something remarkable. Not only knowledge, but permission. The knowledge that the body knows how to sleep, that the struggle is not a flaw, that the path back to rest is not through effort but through ease. Permission to stop trying. Permission to let go. Permission to simply be here, in the dark, in the warmth, in the quiet that is already arriving. You have traveled far tonight. through the chemistry of cortisol and adenosine, through the architecture of sleep stages, through the neuroscience of memory and emotion, and the ancient rhythm of the circadian clock. All of it leading here, to this breath, to this stillness, to the moment when knowing becomes resting, and resting becomes sleep. The night is gentle. The darkness is safe. The weight of the day is already lifting. Fact by fact, breath by breath, dissolving into the quiet chemistry of a brain that knows, at last, that it is time. You can let go now. There is nothing left to understand tonight. Rest is not earned. It is not a reward for a productive day or a resolved worry. It is a biological right, as fundamental as hunger, as old as life itself. You are allowed to rest tonight, not because you have finished everything, but because you are alive. And alive things must rest. And resting is the most honest thing a living body can do. The science has spoken. The body has listened. Now the mind can follow into the soft, unhurried darkness, into the waiting quiet, into sleep, which has been here all along, patient as a tide, waiting for you to stop walking away from the shore. Everything that needed to be understood has been understood. Everything that needed to be carried has been set down. The day is behind you now. What lies ahead is only rest. Deep, undefended, fully accepted rest, arriving the way it always arrives. Through the door you leave open. What your sleep struggle says about you is the most human thing possible. That you are connected to the world. That the world moves through you. That your nervous system is honest enough to tell you when it needs care. And that you are here, listening, breathing, releasing, is already your answer. Tonight, you chose rest. And rest, at last, is choosing you. And so, our quiet journey through the science of sleep comes to a gentle close. We traveled from the molecular architecture of the sleep drive, adenosine building its patient pressure through every waking hour, to the extraordinary choreography of the glymphatic system, clearing the residue of consciousness while you dream. Along the way, we glimpsed something larger than any single fact, that the difficulty of sleeping is not a personal failure, but a biological conversation, and that every restless night is the body's careful, honest language. From cortisol's evening tide to the REM brain's quiet act of emotional alchemy, we have followed the thread of your sleep struggle and found, at its end, not a problem but a map, and you, here, already holding it. Sleep reminds us that the body is always speaking, even when the mind is not listening. Much of its most profound work happens in silence. In the dark hours, when thought recedes and the deeper systems take over, tending to what the day left unfinished. The sleeping brain reveals patience, precision, and a wisdom that waking life does not always make room for. By pausing to notice, we glimpse the extraordinary care woven into the very architecture of the night. In these final minutes, take the deepest breath you can. As deep as possible. Think about unity of every signal, every chemistry, every quiet process working in concert across the vast and intricate network of your body and mind. You are not separate from this. You are not observing it from a distance. You are it. Think about the billions of people who have slept on this earth before you, and the billions sleeping right now, in this moment, across every meridian of the turning world. You are part of that ancient act, part of the oldest thing there is. Let your entire being dissolve into the quiet, into the dark, into the space where thinking ends and rest begins. No boundaries left, only peace. This gentle exploration of sleep science exists for every mind that searches for rest in the quiet hours. A soft share, a quiet tap, a word passed along to someone who also lies awake. It opens this space to one more restless soul, one more peaceful night. We are building this sanctuary together, one sleepy soul at a time. But there is nothing to do now. Nothing at all. You've traveled far tonight, through the chemistry of tiredness, the architecture of the resting brain, the science of everything your struggle has been trying to say. You can allow these thoughts of sleep science to fade now, like words spoken gently in a dream, present for a moment, then softly, naturally, becoming part of the quiet that remains. Let your breathing deepen. Let your body feel heavier, as if the patient pressure of all that accumulated adenosine has finally, fully arrived, and is simply holding you. If sleep comes, let it carry you the way the tide carries what it finds at the shore, without asking, without effort, into a realm where time and weight no longer matter. If your eyes are still open, the next video is waiting for you, ready to continue the journey. But if they're closed, stay there. Stay in the darkness that feels safe and warm. Tomorrow, your sleep system will still be there, still cycling, still tending, still working quietly on your behalf. But tonight belongs to stillness. Rest well, sleepy soul. And remember, every difficult night was the body asking for exactly this. Good night.